Welcome back. This week, top-level road racing continues in Australia and Spain. We have the traditional season opener over in France and the Colombian National Championships as well. But first up, let's hit the mud. Now, even if you're not a huge fan of cyclocross, you have still got to love the World Cyclocross Championships, haven't you? It's just such a party atmosphere throughout the whole weekend, and there was definitely some hot action in the cold conditions of Valkenburg over in the Netherlands. The cyclocross season may have been going since September, but the biggest race of them all, the fight for the coveted rainbow jerseys, took place this last weekend. We had a bit of everything. Foregone conclusions, bitter disappointments, and some fairly major upsets. First up, a special mention to young Ben Tullett. He's a good friend of our tech presenter, John Cannings. Ben won the junior men's event and basically continued from where Tom Pidcock left off 12 months ago. So very well done to you, Ben. Now, speaking of Pidcock, he had a hugely disappointing day in the saddle in the under-23 men's event, managing only 15th on the day, almost 4 minutes behind the winner. A result which is almost unheard of for him. Music, though, to the ears of Eli Isabet, winner of this race 2 years ago. He took advantage of a slip by last year's winner, Dutchman Joris Nieuwenhuis, around midway through the race and was basically never to be seen again. There were no surprises though in the under-23 women's race, as Evie Richards claimed the gold medal for the second time in her short career. That despite a very late mechanical problem, which meant that she was stuck in her easiest gear, spinning away like Billy-O. The elite women's event was the one that many were most looking forward to, with a good 10 riders or so who would be more than capable of finishing on the podium on a good day. It perhaps wasn't quite as close as we had thought or maybe even hoped, but we did get an enthralling ding-dong battle between Sanne, who won this race last year, and the American Katie Compton. Going into the last lap, it was in fact the American who led, but if there's one thing that defines Cant, it's that dogged determination and never say die attitude. She managed to get a small gap over Compton on the last lap, and she didn't need a second invitation. She powered all the way to the finish line to take her second consecutive world title. That, though, heartbreakingly, is Compton's 4th World Championships silver medal. Now, I don't think that anybody, perhaps even Cant herself, would have been disappointed to see Compton, now 39, finally take that elusive gold medal, but it just wasn't to be. And you do wonder if that may have been her last real chance. Time will tell, but there's no doubt that she'd be a more than deserving winner of the World Cyclocross Championships. Cant herself, in fact, paid tribute to Compton since they both raced the full cyclocross season. Cant has been critical in the past of riders who've started their season later and therefore been fresher for the title race at the start of February. Speaking of which, road rider Lucinda Brand gave the Dutch something to cheer about with a bronze medal on the day, whilst Marianne Vos and Pauline Ferrand-Prévot languished in 18th and 24th places respectively. The latter obviously still suffering the after effects of last week's crash in the World Cup. Now, in the men's race, I think Henrik Enberg summed it up best on Twitter. A one-man show no one expected. Yep, few could have predicted anything but a Mathieu van der Poel win at the weekend. He has just been head and shoulders above the rest all season, right up, in fact, to last weekend. But perhaps we shouldn't have been quite as surprised as we were. After all, for the past 2 years, Wout van Aert has caused an upset, and this year he has done exactly the same thing again. Very convincingly, you might add. The two were almost locked together on lap 1, but from that point onwards, Van Aert looked powerful and very much in control, whilst Van der Poel looked anything but. The two were, in the end, separated not only by 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but also by another Belgian by the name of Michael van Turenhout. So that's 3 World Championship wins on the trot for Van Aert, which puts him up there with some of the greats of the sport, whilst Van der Poel must be wondering where it all went wrong. And you do have to feel sorry for the Dutchman, don't you? After all, he's had an incredible season over the last few months. Moving on to the road now, and this year's Herald Sun Tour kicked off with a short prologue in Melbourne. And when I say short, I mean it, even by prologue standards. The distance, just 1.6 kilometres, or almost exactly 1 mile. With that in mind, there was really only one rider who stood out from the rest. Step forward, Ed Clancy. Now he is like a hybrid between an endurance rider and a sprinter, so this stage had his name written all over it. We all know that he is a world-class cyclist. He has multiple Olympic and World Championship gold medals to his name, but they are all on the track. His win, he claimed, was about as good as it's going to get for him over on the road. The following day, though, was characterised by aggressive riding in crosswinds. The Danish rider Lasse Norman Hansen took his first victory for Aqua Blue Sport on stage 1, getting himself the leader's jersey in the process. But his victory was noteworthy for more reasons than that. It has been well publicised that the team are the first in the modern peloton to use just one chainring in the form of SRAM's 1x group set. Now, we have speculated ever since that announcement as to whether or not 1x would be capable of catering for the needs and indeed the demands of top-level professional cyclists. And I guess we now kind of have our answer. Some of you will say that he has made history in winning that stage, whilst others that we've gone back in time. After all, plenty of riders in a bygone era have raced and won at the top level with just one chainring. Nevertheless, it is a big development in a quite intriguing topic. The general classification, though, was always going to be decided on stage 3, which finished on Lake Mountain, a climb that wasn't familiar to many of the riders. Now, we often see the biggest name riders these days wait late to attack on the mountaintop finishes. Not so Esteban Chavez. He flew the nest at the very start of the climb with still 20 kilometres remaining, and the 42-second advantage that he held over the young rider Alexander Evans was enough to propel him into the overall race lead, which he duly kept until the finish of the race. It's been the perfect start really to the season for the Australian squad Mitchelton Scott. They have won the Men's National Championships with Alexander Edmondson, the Tour Down Under with Daryl Impey, and they've now filled all 3 podium spots at the Herald Sun Tour. Cameron Meyer and Damien Howson ended up finishing 2nd and 3rd overall. In the women's 2-day event, we got to see Annemiek van Vleuten debut her rainbow bands as World Time Trial Champion. Their race concluded on that same 1.6 kilometre course. It was a stage that she duly won by a single second over Katrin Garfert. However, it was not enough to overhaul Brodie Chapman, a convincing winner of the opening stage. If you've never heard of her before, it's because her cycling career has been one full of injury and other setbacks. Her breakthrough ride came this year at the National Championships over in Ballarat, where she finished in 6th place. It was enough to prompt national team selectors to ask her if she would like to represent Australia at the Sun Tour. Her overall win there is a potentially life-changing moment for Chapman, who is currently fitting training and racing around a full-time job at Bike Exchange, and also a prime example of just how much perseverance will eventually win through. Chapeau to you, Brodie, you are GCN's Rider of the Week for the start of February. Now over to Spain, and last week Matt mentioned that there is life in the old dog yet. He wasn't talking about himself, but rather Alejandro Valverde. He proved that beyond all reasonable doubt, because not only did he win stage 2 of the Vuelta Valenciana, but he won from a situation where he really shouldn't have been able to. There were 3 riders coming in towards the finish, 2 from Astana and 1 Valverde. The odds were stacked against him, but he duly took his first win since Liège-Bastogne-Liège last spring. He out-sprinted Luis Leon Sanchez and Jakob Fuglsang. And it didn't end there for Valverde. He went on to clinch the Queen stage on day 4 ahead of Mitchelton Scott's Adam Yates, and in the process he effectively wrapped up the overall classification. That is 8 race days for Valverde since his comeback from injury, and 3 wins. The sprinters had their days on the first and last stages of the race, Danny van Poppel and Jurgen Roelants both taking their first wins for their new teams, Lotto NL Jumbo and BMC Racing respectively. The team time trial on day 3 was, of course, won by BMC Racing, but it was in effect the stage that wasn't. Organisers took the decision to nullify the times from the stage due to some slippery conditions and only award the stage victory. Now, it was a decision that was generally met with positive comments from the pro peloton, but we would like to know what you think about this. Should slippery roads be part and parcel of professional racing, or were the organisers right to do what they did in what was, in effect, an early season training race for many? You can let us know your thoughts in the comment section just down below this video. Now, in France, it was pretty much an all-French affair at the 5-day Étoile de Bessèges. That race used to be one of the preparation races for the big pro riders back in the days when there was barely any top-level racing outside of Europe. These days, it is a slightly lower-key event, and as such, French riders managed to fill the first 7 places in the final overall classification. Topping them all was AG2R's Tony Galopin, and he'll be very pleased with that, having finished runner-up in this race for the last 3 years in a row. The only non-French success, in fact, came on stage 4, which was won by Verandas Willem's Sean Deby. FDJ's Marc Serrault won 2 stages, whilst Christophe Laporte won stage 2. The story there, though, was the fact that Brian Coquard raised his arms too early. Now, normally, this is a mistake that a rider only makes once in his or her career, but this is the second time for Coquard, who did exactly the same thing at Dwars door Vlaanderen in 2016. I'm sure he won't be doing it again. Now, before we finish, a couple of bits of news from national championships. Firstly, Team Sky riders Egan Bernal and Sergio Henao took the Colombian National Time Trial and road races respectively. And we also wanted to give a quick shout out to Matthew Glaetzer. Competing recently at the Australian National Track Championships, he broke his own 1 kilometre time trial record by over 0.2 of a second, which he'd set last November back in Manchester. Now, that is an average speed of over 60 kilometres per hour from a standing start. Mental. And finally, many fans out there of Daniel Tecla-Heymanno will be delighted and relieved to know that he's found himself a contract. Having been let go by Dimension Data, it was touch and go for the Eritrean, but he will now be racing for the French squad Cofidis. Meanwhile, Chantal Black has signed a 2-year extension to her Bulls-Dullman's contract. Good news for both sides there. That's it for this week, but next week we'll be back as the European race season continues down in Murcia, Almeria and Andalusia. We've also got the first high-profile international stage race in Colombia, and the Middle Eastern action kicks off over in Dubai. Speaking of Dubai, our man John Cannings will be on the ground there. In fact, he is, as we speak, picking up all the new bikes and kit and tech. So keep your eye on the GCN Tech channel for his reports from the Dubai tour. If you missed last week's GCN show, you'll be able to find that by clicking just down here. We asked what makes the perfect ride. And if you've enjoyed this video, why not give us a thumbs up down below.